Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou. Ko Tūhoi te iwi, ko Ngāti Kaura te apu, ko Otanuku te marae, ko Tracey McIntosh, aho. I am bereft of voice, and I stand before you and I attempt to bring you to the voices of those who are spoken of, yet really spoken to. I attempt to bring you the voice, and more importantly, the experience of those who, through the realities of their lives, are experts, as Kylie said, of their own condition. Anyone who knows me recognises that my enforced quietness is novel, and for some, most welcome. And yet it has made me think even more closely about how power is invested in those that are able to articulate and define the world we live in. We are able to, or in those who are able to, or indeed permitted to, speak with strong, resonant voices, who are afforded the luxury of the public space, and those who are excluded from those spaces. We heard yesterday, and we repeat today, the imperative to be informed in our decision-making by those who have experience of living with addiction at the personal, at the whānau, and at the community level. And I recognise and acknowledge those of you who are here today. Let us listen, and it is not sufficient just to listen. Let us listen and learn from those whose lives, past, present, and future, are shaped by our current and future legislative regime. We have ability as a collective to make decisions that can change the lives of thousands. Now, I've taken a magic pill that will allow me to, hopefully, to speak during this time. In the context of this thing, I sort of thought about that magic pill, but I won't go any further than that. I guess the things that I want to go through, I just need to work out how to do this. I want to just start each time the wrong way. So because of the voice, but I'm really happy about this voice, as people will know, this is the best that I've sounded for 4 weeks. But I've got something for those that become fatigued by listening to it, is a parallel seminar going. So I'm wanting to bring the words of the women that I work with. These all of the words that you will see that will come up on the screen are of young women who are incarcerated. Not one of these young women, even given some of the content in their poems, all of them are teenagers, and all were teenagers when they wrote this. So I'm very much bringing them here. They know that they are here, and they hope that you will both listen and learn. I'm wanting us to really look at the understanding of the context and experience of prison. I'm wanting us to think around the way that drug policy reforms and strategies of decarceration are explicitly linked. And I'm wanting to, again, just for us to think constantly about who truly are the experts in this area. All of us see the world through a range of prisms that privilege what it is highlighted to us. My work is looking at the realities and impacts of poverty, the experience of prisoners and ex-prisoners, gang-related whānau, particular focus on young Māori, and specifically young Māori women who have already been caught up in the criminal justice system and who have entered into the prison system. I want to start, as I often do, by drawing on Moana Jackson as a starting point of the last sentence of his report, written in 1988 on Māori and the criminal justice system, where he said, "We needed to begin a debate about the Māori justice system. The debate is immediate. The long-term development will take time. It's where we can have real hope. The intergenerational gaze of Māori goes beyond 3-year political cycles, goes beyond 5, 10, 15 years funding cycles. It's that intergenerational gaze. It's that makapunatanga it's where we will make it. So we've got critical issues we face today. I have absolute confidence that we have the ability to create change for the generations to come. Moana also reminds us that those who take power unjustly defend it with injustice. The relationship between a punitive drug policy and the disproportionately within the prison system is significant. I heard what Tim said, that Alison, that you said, in terms of these counter voices, and recognise that in many ways it does seem like we are drawing from the same hymn book. Like many of us, I work closely with police. I obviously are engaged a lot with corrections. I sit on a lot of justice and other types of advisory panels. I know that in our own communities, Emma and I, Julia and I yesterday were with some of our gang-related whānau doing some other work, and we were talking about what had happened here today. And there's a very broad range of views, even in communities that are living with substance misuse and the issues associated with it on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, that listening and that debate covers all people. So over the last 8, 9, 10 years, I've gone into Auckland Regional Women's Correction Facility on a weekly basis. Largely, I deliver a creative writing program as well as educational support. That's voluntary work, but it also aligns strongly with my research work. Some of the young women that I've worked with were 16 when I first met them, and some of them are now in their early 20s. This research is modelled on life course research where the commitment to life course development is critical. While I work from women with all backgrounds, the fact that such a large proportion of women prisoners are Māori, and particularly how nearly complete of those that are aged between 16 and 25 means that the vast majority of women I work with are Māori. Popular discourse often holds individuals responsible for the drug-related harms they experience, while too little attention is paid to the suffering and loss caused by the criminalising of those who use drugs. And I do want to talk about that in terms of policy, that we often talk about that you can have good drug policy and bad politics. We can even have good policy that has poor outcomes. If I just want to look at something like the zero tolerance policy of drugs and violence within our compulsory school system, anyone can see that that's a reasonable type of policy to put forward. We want our children being educated in places that are drug-free and safe. What it's doing in practice is denying our young people, our young Māori, the right of an education. Of all of the young women that I've seen come into the prison system in the last decade, every single one of them, with only one exception, was excluded from the compulsory education system by the age of 13. The youngest I have seen excluded from the education system was 6. In nearly all cases, what are the results of living in spaces where everything you're living under conditions of scarcity and deprivation, and where the abundance may be not the things that allow you to flourish, but may do otherwise. I just want to speak very, very quickly to the Waitangi 5420 claim, and I want to recognise you here, Roimata, Smell, for her work. In terms of this claim, and also recognise Julia and others who also gave expert evidence or were communities of interest. This claim was about the disproportionate reoffending rates, and it was an urgent inquiry concerning the Crown's action and policies in reducing the disproportionate rate of Māori reoffending. And I just want to speak to the report that came out after that. The tribunal sat from last year, 25th to 29th of July, so nearly a year ago. The Crown has failed to make a long-term commitment to reducing the high rate of Māori reoffending relative to non-Māori. The claim must be seen against the backdrop of statistics relating to imprisonment in New Zealand. Māori constitute, as we have heard, 15%, just a little over 15% of the national population, but make up more than the 50% of the prison muster. The overall national prison muster now is approximately 10,000. It was generally accepted that this meant at any one time there are 20,000 children in New Zealand with a parent in prison. Based on current figures, that suggests at least 10,000 Māori children are likely to have parents in prison. Think about those drag results. Think about how many people coming in. Think what that does to whānau. It's devastating for whānau. It's devastating for communities. It's devastating for our nation. The broad context of our inquiry into the rates of Māori offending and re-imprisonment is that of a particularly bleak situation for Māori in the New Zealand criminal justice system. Here I'm reading from the report. And it gives a whole range of the statistics, and these were agreed upon statistics. The picture that clearly emerged, regardless of the measures or figures presented, was that Māori men and women are overwhelmingly disproportionately represented. I mean, you've got some sort of figures there that are sort of astonishing. If you look in terms of the recidivism rate, certainly far worse than any others, but if you look at the 5-year rate, recidivism rate, 80% recidivism rate over a 5-year period, 80%. A lot of that looking around what we call administrative things, breaches, a lot of those breaches related to alcohol and drug use. So the ongoing carceralisation of Indigenous communities has resulted in a profound unfreedom for Māori. Prisons are seen as a natural attribute of the social landscape. It's difficult to imagine a world without them, in the same ways that for many people it's difficult to imagine a world where drug reform can actually create the conditions of flourishing. Prisons remain unproblematized and largely invisible, and the reason I'm going into this in context is because everyone in this room knows about the disproportionality of Māori in the prison, and we know it so much. It's such a well-known social statistic that we normalise it. We act like it's a part of our natural environment, that it's like our rivers that flow and our trees that bloom. It is not a part of our natural landscape, and like it's a part of our social landscape. It has been made and it can be unmade. So prisons remain largely unproblematized, largely invisible both as an institution and experience, but however they are not invisible from headlines, not invisible as a metaphor of society gone wrong. Importantly in the drug debate, not invisible as a solution to problems, not invisible as the most overt manifestation of state power and as architectures of control. But they remain invisible as receptacles of confined experience, which I'm hope that you're capturing with these young women's word, as institutions of stone, concrete, wire, but most importantly, they are holders of flesh and blood. Prisons are peopled. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, as noted, they are largely holders of Māori flesh and blood. And more specifically, they are holders of particular veins of Māori society. So we have to be clear that mass incarceration in New Zealand is Māori incarceration. And mass incarceration is defined as when the rates of incarceration impact negatively on certain sectors of society who share similar ethnic and socioeconomic characteristics, creating the conditions for cumulative and intergenerational disadvantage. Mass incarceration impacts not only those who are behind the wire, but also the whānau and communities they come from. As American criminologist Elliot Curry notes, and here I'm quoting him, short of major wars, mass incarceration has been the most thoroughly implemented social program of our time. We do need to be clear. There is no correlation anywhere in the world between the imprisonment rate and the crime rate. The imprisonment rate is not a measure of crime. If it was a measure of a crime, we wouldn't understand why our crime rate goes down and our incarceration goes up in the levels that it has. So as I said, it is not a measure of crime, it is a measure of the consumption of punishment. New Zealand society does not just have a high tolerance for high incarceration, it has an enthusiasm for it. So I was going to talk, but I think I will leave that now in talking about the silencing of Indigenous experience and perspectives and the pursuit of crime control knowledge and the way that sits. So the relationship between a punitive drug policy and the disproportionality within the prison system is significant. Who bears the burden of our present drug policy? Both in terms of being vulnerable to punitive state action and being vulnerable to the mechanism of drug distribution and from the exclusion from treatment and services. Alex Wodak, in his article in The Lancet, noted that resistance to drug law reform continued in part because, as I noted, bad policy is often good politics. The pernicious effects of drug supply by a black market can be difficult to separate from the direct harms of the drugs themselves. Although redefining drugs as primarily a health and social issue rather than a criminal justice problem is an important advance, the supply of drugs on the black market is inevitable if demand persists without reform of drug laws. When enforcement is prioritised, the illicit drug use problem is understood as a problem of criminality, resting on the conflation of illegal drug use with crime and social disorder. Moreover, for people coping with social dislocation, poverty, homelessness, a range of exposure to social hazards, substance use can be a solution to pain, to loss, to boredom, to a whole range of elements. And again, we see that coming up with the young women. So it noted, with very few exceptions, as I said, when substance use is framed as a problem rather than as a response to socially inflicted pain, the social environmental drivers of inequities and trauma that lead to problematic substance use become obscured. As I noted, all of the women that I've met, with the one exception, were excluded from the compulsory education system by 13. All of the women that I've worked with have experienced high levels of social harm and have had lives that were characterised by a range of features, with drug and alcohol being a very common feature amongst all of the women. For many of the women, and when I talk about women, I'm actually talking about girls, their own incarceration, their first incarceration, was not their first experience of prison. A significant number of them have been in for drug-related offences and drug-related violence offences. A number of those young women have come in as teenagers to serve life sentences. I have got a lot more there. I guess I just want to finish on a few things, because even though the Te Puna are with me today and giving me this voice, it's quite astonishing actually, being able to talk like that, but I do just want to think about those things. I would love my love for these women means that I would like them to live drug-free lives that allows them to participate, to contribute, and to flourish. My love for these women means I want them to live lives that, if they are not drug-free, means that they can purchase their drugs in safe places, that the options for them in terms of their future are much more positive than they are now. I think it's astonishing that as a country we can allow children, that we can criminalise children, and by criminalising them completely stifle their opportunities for the future. The single greatest opportunity this country has is its young Māori and Pacific age profile. In an ageing nation, the fact that we have this young age profile is incredibly important. We can reap the demographic dividends of that young age profile. Linda Tuhiwai Smith says, our young people will serve. How they serve determines how we invest now. We must create the conditions for change. It's a difficult area. It's a messy area. The notion, as we saw yesterday, around consensus is always going to be problematic. It is difficult for us to think, when we see particularly the damage that P is doing, that we could think that if we legalise cannabis and set P on its own, where we use it, whereas when our most dangerous drug remains outside of a legal framework, how do we truly then address it? Do we leave the thing that gives the most harm outside of that place? Do we continue to criminalise those? We often say as Māori that we're constantly asked to create cultural solutions to structural problems. These are structural problems, and they must have structural solutions. Are we able to do it? Do we have the confidence? Can we show global leadership? I believe that absolutely that we can. Kia ora tātou.